Okay, good morning. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today is December 18, 2020, and this is the sixth session in the forum Earth Science New Map. And today I am very privileged to introduce Dr. Robert Stern as our speaker today, and his topic on biogeodynamics is very, very timely, and it is something that I am particularly interested in as well. Dr. Stern is Professor of Geosciences at the University of Texas in Dallas. He has been on the faculty since 1982. So most of his scientific research has been on studying modern and ancient plate tectonics in various parts of the world. He has published over 250 peer-reviewed papers in various journals, and you can find this information on Google Scholar profile. He has led a really active and prolific career. He is leading several programs at the University of Texas at Dallas, including the Permian Basin Research Lab, Global Magmatic and Tectonic Laboratory, and Geoscience Studios. He's a fellow of the GSA and AGU and has served as editor-in-chief of International Geology Review since 2013. So without further delay, I'd like to hand over the session and the screen to Dr. Stern. And we will have Q&A at the end of his presentation, so please bear with us, and then you can also post your questions on the chat box. Okay, Bob, we are ready.
Okay, thank you, Rasul. And it's a pleasure having so many people listen to my ramblings. Some of which are old friends and some of which are new. Welcome. I hope you don't have too much snow up there in Utah, but probably you'll go enjoy it this weekend and go ski, so good for you. So let me share my screen. Share. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Make it full screen. All right, so I want to talk about biogeodynamics. This is something that Taras Gurya at ETH in Zurich and I are working on. But it's a new field. We think it's a new field with deep roots. And we hope it's something that grows as we go into the 21st century. So why do we care about biogeodynamics? Because it's new, exciting, doable, and important. So it's increasingly clear that Earth's geodynamic evolution is intimately tied to the evolution of atmosphere, oceans, landscape, and life. And elements of what we're calling biogeodynamics appear among the top research questions shaping 21st Earth science. Basically the question, how has life shaped Earth and how has Earth shaped life? Although, because biology and geology are such different fields, we often talk past each other. We often don't recognize the importance of the other scientific communities, but there are many things that we have in common, and we should start building better links between our two scientific efforts. So this year, very timely, the National Academy came out with a report, a new vision for NSF Earth Sciences for the next decade, and it's free for download. And they identified 12 high priority questions in the report, 7 of which are parts of biogeodynamics, which tells you just how ambitious and perhaps important this area is. So here are the 12 questions for that the Academy suggested that NSF should focus on. I won't go through these all. What I'm going to do is show you the 7 that have become, we can call parts of biogeodynamics. So those are the 7. Let's go through them one by one. How, when, and why did plate tectonics start? The topic near and dear to my heart, but when it started and whatever happened before played a big role in evolution of life. Second, how are critical elements distributed and cycled in the Earth? This is related to question 2, as well as what we know about what's going on with element redistribution in the plate tectonic Earth. What are the causes and consequences of topographic change? That's a very central topic in biogeodynamics. How does the critical zone influence climate? What is the role of soil in influencing climate and other things for that matter? That is related to biogeodynamics. What does Earth's past reveal about the dynamics of the climate system? Obviously, this is related to Earth's tectonic behavior, both within plate tectonics and before plate tectonics. How do biogeochemical cycles work, evolve? That is clearly of interest to biogeodynamics. Oops, sorry. And finally, how do geological processes influence biodiversity? Well, that is, as central to biogeodynamics as question 2 is. These are the heart of the NSF report, even though they nowhere identify biogeodynamics as something that NSF should be working on. All right, so the idea for this came from a talk in 2018 in London, where Aubrey Zirkle gave this talk, Biogeodynamics, Bridging the Gap Between Surface and Deep Earth Processes. And Taras and I were both there, and we got very excited. And we noted that the timescales of tectonics and biological evolution are similar. The surface spatial scales are similar. Now, these two systems are very different in mass, but life is, even though it's volumetrically less important, is more important to us in many ways, as COVID reminds us over and over again. So Aubrey sort of started the snowball down the hill and caught us up in it. So let's talk a little bit about the roots of biogeodynamics. One of the first questions people have is, well, what's different about this? Because it does have a lot of elements in common with other things that are going on between biology and geology. But we have to look back to Vernadsky and his concepts of the biosphere. We need to think about Lovelock and Margulis's contributions and the Gaia hypothesis. And we should definitely acknowledge and take advantage of the efforts that NASA and other space agencies have made in developing Earth system science. These are all parts of biogeodynamics heritage. So Vernadsky was early 20th century influential thinker about geology and coined the term the biosphere, where atmosphere, cryosphere, hydrosphere, and lithosphere interact. He would have, I'm sure, be pleased to learn about plate tectonics and DNA and all sorts of things that we knew nothing about in 1945 when he died. But a very influential, and he looks influential too with a picture like that. And of course, the Gaia hypothesis of Lovelock and Margulis, the idea that life somehow interacts with the solid Earth to maintain an equitable climate, and all of the things that came out of that, looking at the system, that is definitely something that plays an important role in our heritage. And of course, Earth system science, NASA's Earth observing system, other space agencies as well, giving us data all the time on what's going on in the Earth's surface in terms of deformation, in terms of CO2, the data stream from this is amazing. And we definitely want to take advantage of the things that it's teaching us. All right, so there's really two great branches of biogeodynamics. We can talk about the biogeodynamics of nutrients, which is how nutrients are delivered to the surface, to the life system. And then there's the biogeodynamics of the environment, which is concerns, landscape, climate, the distribution of ocean and land. And let's take each of them. So life is sustained by a critical set of elements that's contained within rock, ocean, and atmospheric reservoirs, and cycled by plate tectonics between Earth's surface and the interior via various processes. And we want to understand how geodynamics controls this, and how does this supply influence life, biodiversity, and evolution. So I'll use a very simple example of phosphorus later in the presentation as one of these important, we can call them bioactive elements. And the second one is the biogeodynamics of the environment, which is landscape, climate, ocean, land. So plate tectonics redistributes continents, grows mountain ranges, causes sea level to rise and fall, forms land bridges, and opening and closing oceans. These things provide continuous but moderate environmental pressures that isolate and stimulate populations to adapt and evolve. There's a strong element of biological evolution that's controlled by what the surface of the Earth is doing. And in addition, there are mantle plumes and large igneous provinces that can provide episodic but potentially extreme environmental pressures that we have to keep in mind. All right, so how do we attack this? It's a huge problem. It's going to require a lot of thinking and a lot of doing and a lot of people in the community that want to contribute. So here are some ideas. So first, in order to attack the biogeodynamics problem, we need to use specific examples like mountain environments and continental breakup settings to investigate the relationship between life, tectonics, landscape, and climate based on collecting data in the field and modeling that. And then testing and further developing, especially the Gaia hypothesis, by quantifying some long-term global feedbacks between life, atmosphere, ocean, climate, landscape, and Earth's interior. So these two are more tractable than the next two. The next two are to understand over plate tectonic cycles like the Supercontinent Cycle and the Wilson Cycle, how these interactions vary. And I'll talk a little bit about this. And the second thing is the larger question of from one tectonic style to another. How we now have plate tectonics. We surely didn't have plate tectonics from the beginning of the Earth. And we'll talk a little bit about this. So the first parts are amenable to student projects. Really the drivers of science ultimately come from the research that students do for masters and especially PhDs. But this information is needed to develop some quantitative models that we can apply first to things we understand better, like plate tectonic cycles, like the Supercontinent Cycle, and next to the transition between one tectonic style to another, and in particular from single lid to plate tectonics, and vice versa. So this actually gives us the outlines of a long-term work plan. And when I say long-term, I think we're talking about decades. But first, let's develop tools for talking with biologists, talking with soil scientists, climate people. Let's develop the community that's interested in these relationships and get the students working on specific problems to develop models and data that we can test, develop equations, test hypotheses. And then to test and further develop, use these insights, we're going to have community discussions. We're going to need workshops, whether they're like these on Zoom or in person. That remains to be developed. But we have to develop a community that's interested and knows how to talk to all members of the community. And then we can start thinking about reconstructing how different tectonic regimes affected this over time, within plate tectonic cycles and from one tectonic style to another. So over plate tectonic cycles like the supercontinent cycle, we can usefully start thinking about geodynamic modeling. From one tectonic style to another, we're right now in the stage of thought experiments, and that's fine. This field, if it has any sustainability, is going to require new team members and people taking the ball and advancing it up the field. All right, so ETH team led by Taras Guria is being built. He got a very nice grant from the Swiss National Science Foundation, and with a collaborator, Loic Pellissier, who's an expert in biology, ecology, and numerical modeling, and Cedric Gilman, whose expertise is in atmosphere and climate modeling. They're putting together a team of one postdoc, right now 3 PhD students, that are looking at different problems. Tilla is looking at modeling of landscape evolution at plate boundaries. Dominique is looking at coupled geodynamic and biogeographic models. Timothy is looking at, Let me make go away. Modeling sea level evolution through the supercontinent cycle. And then Julian is modeling climate between vegetation, modeling coupling between vegetation and climate. So these student projects are going together, and as you can imagine, there's room for a lot more. A lot more. I don't know whether it's at ETH, but at other places. Okay, let's see. So let's leave the first part of the biogeodynamics work plan aside, and let's talk about the big picture stuff for the rest of this talk. So we'll talk about, first, let's talk about how different tectonic regimes affected the biosphere over plate tectonic cycles, like the supercontinent cycle and the Wilson cycle. So plate tectonic cycles of supercontinent cycle, Wilson cycle, they affect the biosphere over several 100 million year scale. So here we can see a synopsis of 2 supercontinent cycles. At the end of the Precambrian, Greater Gondwana or Panotia broke up in most of Paleozoic time and then reformed at the end of Paleozoic as supercontinent Pangaea, which broke up and is starting to reassemble now. So we can see these 1.5 supercontinent cycles in the Phanerozoic. And the Wilson cycle is just the marine equivalent of that. So it's easier to understand the continents for geologists. So we'll probably focus on the supercontinent cycle, but the Wilson cycle is strictly equivalent. So the supercontinent cycle controls collisional mountain formation, which is important for nutrient supply and climate. The Wilson cycle controls the shelf area distribution, and that's important for marine invertebrate evolution, and sea level, which is important for climate. So you just start thinking about the big picture implications of these cycles. So 50 years ago, amazing, Valentine and Moores developed this idea, the plate tectonic regulation of faunal diversity and sea level. And they put this together from marine invertebrate phyla. That's numbers of phyla on the left. There's the tectonic simplified Supercontinent Cycle, even though it wasn't called that at that time. And what they could see is that when the continental fragments was broken up, there was more diversity. And this was in marine invertebrates, so it's not on land until, of course, the Devonian. This is seeing marine invertebrates. And they summarized their work as the expected effects of transgressions and regressions tend to reinforce the effects of the ecological regulators of diversity. Widespread transgressions moderate seasonal climates. Widespread regressions tend to enhance continentality. Species area effects of expanding and shrinking epicontinental seas, which may have less influence on marine biodiversity than those other factors, nevertheless be important. And according to them, they could sort of sense the biogeodynamics, because all of these factors operate in concert. That's the end of their paper and the beginning of biogeodynamics. A couple of years ago, Zaphos and al. Took another look at this. They quantified it more, came up with a thing called the fragmentation index, and index value of 1 indicates complete fragmentation, and index value of 0 corresponds to a supercontinent. So there is the fragmentation index, basically what Valentine and Moore saw, but it was done in a computer, so we have to believe it. And then they plotted that against the range through time of generic richness. And this is the scatter plot with the statistics. And you can see that as fragmentation increases, the general level diversity increases. And they confirmed, Valentine and Moores, that continental fragmentation has exerted a first order control on long-term trajectory of Phanerozoic marine animal diversity. So there's this strong evidence that the supercontinent cycle strongly influences life. All right, now here we see the fragmentation index at the top from Zaphos, and there we have the atmospheric CO2 from 4 proxies by Mills et al. Paleosol, boron, alkanones, I don't even know what that is, stomata, which are leaf openings. And you can see that there's something like the supercontinent cycle seen in atmospheric CO2 by these reconstructions. It's not one-to-one, but you can see a similar cycle offset a bit. That begs the question is, what is the relationship between atmospheric CO2 and the supercontinent cycle or the Wilson cycle? Now, Phanerozoic climate change, obviously there's a lot of interest in that for different reasons today, but you don't see the reconstructions as well. Now, maybe, because our climate reconstructions are based on oxygen 18, we don't have as good of a picture of that as we do for atmospheric CO2. But there's obviously important work to be done figuring out what is the control on climate by atmospheric CO2. All right, now climate is critical because life flourishes. In looking for habitable planets, it seems they only care about liquid water, which can go up to 99 degrees centigrade. But the influence of climate on life is tighter than that. Life really flourishes between about 10 and 30 degrees centigrade. And while it might extend to higher and lower temperatures, it doesn't flourish. This is just sort of an example from a microbe. And it's pretty clear. And if we think about ourselves, or let's say coral reefs or anything, that curve isn't too far off in terms of where life really flourishes. So there is this very strong implement, sort of Gaia hypothesis consideration that we need to somehow figure out through biogeodynamics. Now, atmospheric carbon dioxide and plate tectonics, those relationships are increasingly well understood. So we know that CO2 is added to the atmosphere by volcanism. It's removed by weathering and by burial of organic carbon. And it's recycled into the mantle by subduction, where it may be remobilized and put back into the atmosphere. So plate tectonics control on long-term CO2 is pretty well understood. So back to the supercontinent cycle and atmospheric CO2, can we explain the main features of the atmospheric CO2, shown here in log scale, and the supercontinent cycle? And I think we can. So here we see in the Carboniferous and Permian, we see this CO2 low. And this is a time when we would have expected, when we know there was more collisional mountain building, more silicate weathering would have resulted from more collisional mountain building, and this would have drawn down CO2. And later in the early to mid Mesozoic, as the supercontinent fragmentation is proceeding, you have more rifting and large igneous provinces, more mantle degassing, more CO2 input into the atmosphere. And to a first order, the tectonic controls seem reasonable. In addition, we have got what sea level is doing. Sea level is a very important part of the climate system. And it is, and emphasis now is on glacier melting, which can have a very high frequency, but relatively low amplitude signal compared to what the mean seafloor depth does, which has a much larger signal over a much longer amplitude. But basically, the idea is that the first order control on sea level is by the mean age of seafloor. Older mean age of seafloor is deeper seafloor, which means lower sea level. Younger mean age of the seafloor means shallower seafloor and higher sea level. And we can see that here in this simple cartoon from Nance et al. And sea level predictably rises and falls with the supercontinent cycle. Very low at the beginning, high in the middle stages, low at the end. And here we can see their model for Phanerozoic time. Let's see, there's 4 different lines there, a little confusing. The blue is the depth of seawater on the continental shelf in meters, and so today we're over here, and during the breakup phase, sea level was 200 meters higher. During continental assembly, it was 300 meters lower. Number of continents there in purple, percentage of platform flooding. You can see there, basically we're talking about whether or not you had big continental shelves or not. And so this is a really important signal controlling sea level and climate ultimately. And we can see that in the sea level curves. We can argue which one is right, but the Exxon and the Hallam et al. Curves and any other are going to show about the same features. Low sea level during Pangaea, low sea level during Pannotia, Greater Gondwana at the end of the Precambrian, and high sea level between supercontinents. So let's talk about the supercontinent Wilson cycle and biogeodynamics in terms of nutrient supply, and then habitat creation and destruction and climate. So as an example of a critical element, let's talk about phosphorus. So the Redfield ratio is very important in life. Pretty much all life has this relationship between 106 carbons to 16 nitrogens to 1 phosphorus. So phosphorus in many ways is the most important nutrient. And that's because it powers life via the ATP ADP cycle. So ADP takes up a phosphate group, has energy, releases it. That's the Energizer bunny of life. So more phosphorus, easier to do this. Less phosphorus, harder to do this. So let's talk about biogeodynamics and the supercontinent cycle. So early in the supercontinent cycle, we're going to have a supercontinent. We're going to have, as rifting begins, we'll have moderate uplifts on the rift flanks, typically no more than a couple of kilometers. So there'll be some weathering and erosion that will result in moderate fixation of CO2 and moderate phosphorus supply. Sea level will be low, and because of high CO2 emissions and the supercontinentality, you're likely to have a harsh climate, sometimes called an icehouse climate, but the Sahara Desert is also an example of a supercontinent cycle. In the middle of the supercontinent cycle, we see reduced relief, rising higher sea level, reduced erosion and phosphorus supply, moderate CO2. And then at the end of the supercontinent cycle, when the collisional mountains form, we see high erosion and weathering with a high phosphorus supply. I'm sorry, I've written strong CO2 emissions there. That should be strong CO2 drawdown and lower sea level. And so we'll go back into a harsh climate, but for different reasons. We can see these drivers of climate and life, nutrients, and habitats changing over the supercontinent cycle in ways that are very amenable to treatment by biogeodynamics once we have the tools. So let's finish up with the last topic, which is biogeodynamics from one tectonic style to another. And so this is sort of framed in a question and answer point of view. Question, is there a different tectonic style than plate tectonics? And the answer is yes, with an exclamation mark. Question, what is this called? Answer, this is called single lid tectonics, where a single quasi-coherent lithospheric shell encompasses the hot planetary interior. Single lid contrasts with plate tectonics, which is characterized by multiple lithospheric fragments that move independently and interact differently. Question, is there only one kind of single lid tectonics? Answer, no, there are several. And for some insights, let's look at some of the other active silicate bodies for examples. So here we have the other three big active silicate bodies. Earth is the fourth. We have plate tectonics. And these other three all have some kind of single lid tectonics, but they're all different. Io is the inner moon of Jupiter, and it's kept in a high energy interior because of tidal squeezing. And so it's got more active volcanism than any other body. It's a single lithospheric plate. And so basalt comes out, flows over, gets buried by more basalt, gets buried. Eventually it gets down to the melt zone, melts again, starts it all over. It's called heat pipe. Early Earth may have experienced something like that. Venus, in many ways Earth's twin, is a single lid planet which is dominated by many plumes and drips. And so it looks like something like delamination is controlling the recycling of near surface materials back into the interior. And Mars is an example of a few good plumes and rifts, or actually just one rift, Valles Marineris. But we're basically looking here a very energetic silicate single lid body in Io, a pretty vigorous one in Venus, and Mars is almost dead. So this brings up the idea of how does tectonics evolve in a silicate body, as we go from magma ocean at the beginning to something like the moon, which is not active. We can call that terminal stagnant lid. I'm using stagnant lid and single lid synonymously here. There's heat pipe, which is when the first protocrust develops with a partial melt zone. And then drips and plumes as you start to develop a mantle lithosphere. And with cooling, planetary aging, the lithosphere will thicken and strengthen. And at some point, you can have plate tectonics, which is what Earth has. There's some point where the lithosphere, some Goldilocks place where the lithosphere is thick enough to sink and weak enough to break at the surface and strong enough to stay together. And that's plate tectonics. So plate tectonics is an unusual tectonic style. We know that from space exploration. Now, I want to make a slight diversion here and a plug. One of the things I like to do is make videos about the Earth. Please go to our website on YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, UTD Geoscience Studios. Lots of videos there. Subscribe. You might enjoy it. One of the things we made was this video about an earthquake that happened near you, and you might enjoy that. It's not even 3 minutes long, so I strongly encourage you, take a look. But I do want to show you a video that's got to do with today's topic, which is about emergence. And I'm going to stop sharing very quickly and reshare. It's a 2-minute video. Let's go to, how do I get out of this? In video, and show. Now let's go to this video. Copy. There we go, there's the video. And I'm going to share the screen again. And this is a 2.5-minute video.
The concept of emergent phenomenon explains that any high energy, far from equilibrium system will organize itself in ways that cannot be predicted from knowing its individual components. In a nutshell, an emergent system will organize itself so that energy flows in the system will be less chaotic. Emergence is not a theory. It is a way of looking at many different kinds of energetic systems. Emergence is closely related to self-organization, complexity, and evolution. Many things exhibit emergent behavior. Animals, ecosystems, oceanic currents, hurricanes and spiral galaxies, hydrothermal systems, and civilizations are just a few examples. In emergent systems, low-level rules for constituent parts give rise to higher-level system complexity. Entirely new properties and behaviors emerge, without direction and with characteristics that cannot be predicted from knowledge of the constituents alone. In the January issue of GSA Today, Bob Stern of UT Dallas and Taras Guria of ETH Zurich discussed how thinking about emergence can help us gain new perspectives about Earth history. In this short groundwork article, they discuss how thinking about emergence can help us understand Earth and other silicate planets and moons and how their tectonics evolved. Convecting silicate planets are high-energy, far from equilibrium systems, and as their interiors cool, their lithospheres respond by becoming thicker, denser, and stronger. On Earth, these tectonic styles are likely to have merged into the plate tectonic system we see today. Want to learn more? Check out Earth Evolution, Emergence, and Uniformitarianism in the link provided below.
Okay, so I'll go back, stop sharing that, go back to the PowerPoint. Start sharing again. So emergence in a way is a counterpoint to uniformitarianism. And uniformitarianism is creating a problem in the development of our science. So I will leave it at that. Earth's tectonic style and biogeodynamics are both emergent phenomena. In fact, you can talk about these as co-emergent phenomena. So, okay, if we accept that there's this other style of Earth tectonics, when did our present situation of plate tectonics start? And the answer to that is depends on who you ask. So, okay, let's see if I can get this to advance. There we go. So here's a Palin et al. Paper in press, and around here in black are all of the different ages, times for the start of plate tectonics. You know, I'm here, you know, Warren Hamilton is there. These in purple are some important issues, but you can see that the geologic community mostly thinks that plate tectonics began in the Archean.
You have to reshare your screen.
Uh-oh. Let's see. Oh, I see what I did. I didn't. There we go. Microsoft PowerPoint. Okay. Failed to start. Trees try to share again. Huh. Okay, share. Let me get out of this. And go back to this. Sorry for my technical incompetence. See it now? You should be able to see it now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. So I covered that point. This is the controversy about when plate tectonics began. In black are all of the, you know, people that have, and there's many more that think that plate tectonics began in the Archean or the Hadean. And I just want to make clear you understand that I'm in a minority. But there's a paper in GSA today that might interest some of you. This is, you know, if I make the argument that plate tectonics began in the Neoproterozoic, then single lid had to have happened in the Mesoproterozoic. Is there evidence for that? I think there is. And you can see this in the plate tectonic indicators. You know, ophiolites, blue schist, lawsonite, bearing rocks, jadotite, ultra high pressure metamorphic rocks, ruby and sapphire. Dominantly, these are lithologies and minerals of Neoproterozoic and younger time, with a couple back here in the Paleoproterozoic. Now, it's not so easy to come up with single lid indicators, but if we think that the magma should be relatively dry, then we see A-type granites, incredible abundance of them in the Mesoproterozoic. Same thing with anorthosites, which are being shown here in the photograph up left. Sorry, turn that off. Insulation indicator, which is the thermal barometric ratio from Brown, Michael Brown and his group, showing that this was a remarkably warm time for the lithosphere in the Mesoproterozoic. And then from Dwight Bradley's compilation of passive margin new things, you know, this is a time when almost no, well, when no confidently assigned passive margins form. So the single end indicators for the Mesoproterozoic are quite compelling to me. So the caveat is that the following discussion assumes an active silicate body with continents and oceans. There's no point in talking about any of this if we don't have it. And we do know that biological evolution really took off at the end of the Neoproterozoic. That is something that we understand. It is obviously something to be thinking about as we carry out this discussion about when plate tectonics started, is it needs to have some expression in life. All right, so let's talk very briefly about how different tectonic styles influence life differently among the big three, which I've misnumbered there because I put this together last night. It treats bioactive elements differently, modulates climate differently, and creates habitats differently. And just as a cartoon that you'll see in the GSA Today article, single lid has got no arc magmatism. It's got these different kinds of rocks. It's not going to have as much relief. It's not going to have seafloor spreading. You're not going to have the supercontinent cycle. The nutrient supply is going to be greater during times of plate tectonics. There are pretty strong and obvious implications for the biogeodynamics big three between plate tectonics and single lid. Another important control is the creation of diverse environments for evolution. So this is just a simple thought experiment that's in this paper. And that is, here's a supercontinent with one plant, one herbivore, and one carnivore at time one. And here's the exact same continent surrounded by an ocean with the same animals, plants. It breaks up, and as it isolates, you get different kinds. This one might evolve, but the evolution pathways would be very different than for separated segments. And then when the plate tectonic plans comes back together, you get competition and other environmental pressures. Just the fact that the continents and shelves form and reform exerts a very different evolutionary pressure than a single lid planet where nothing like that happens. So we can just think very big about how single lid versus plate tectonics would affect the biogeodynamics big three. In terms of the bioactive element supply, like phosphorus, single lid would be relatively weak as opposed to plate tectonics, which would be strong. In climate modulation, single lid would not have the ability to create relief and remove material from the seafloor. That climate modulation would be weaker than plate tectonics. And of course, as we just saw, habitat creation and destruction, that's going to be much weaker in single lid than in plate tectonics. So it seems, just from this simple thought experiment, that the two tectonic regimes are going to have very different biogeodynamic systems and controls and impacts. So this is where we are in the field of biogeodynamics today. That's just the start of the yellow brick road. We invite you to join the exploration. We've got a established task force or coordinating committee approved by the International Lithosphere Program, entitled Biogeodynamics of the Lithosphere. That's mainly to get people together. And we have a website. So this one is at ETH. Dominique Stemler is taking it. We'll be building that out. It's just getting going. We encourage you to keep in touch, connect, discuss, and thank you very much for listening.